picture an arrest. You are probably seeing flashing red and blue lights reflecting off the side of a house, maybe a couple of police officers, and you are definitely hearing that cold, heavy click of metal handcuffs.
Yeah, it is a very tangible, undeniable thing.
Exactly. It is an inherently physical event. You are taking a human body, restricting its movement, and placing it inside a physical concrete cell.
Right. And the entire history of our legal system is built around that exact physical interaction. The state asserts its authority over a physical body.
But what if that physical element is just entirely obsolete? Today, we are taking a deep dive into an article titled "The Digital Arrest: Redefining Liberty in a Wired Age," and we are exploring a fundamental, almost invisible shift that is happening right now.
It really is invisible, which is what makes it so striking.
Yeah, we are asking a truly unsettling question. Can the state effectively arrest you, strip away your fundamental liberties, without a single police officer ever showing up at your door, and without anyone ever laying a finger on you?
It sounds like science fiction, but it is very real.
Okay, let's unpack this. I want you to imagine your entire life just being paused. Your ability to buy groceries, to speak to your family, to do your job, all of it halted. Yet your hands are completely free, and you are sitting comfortably on your own couch.
What's fascinating here is that to even begin to understand how that mechanism works, we have to strip away the Hollywood image of the handcuffs. We have to look at the bare legal mechanics.
Right, because the law doesn't actually say you need metal bracelets, does it?
No, not at all. Legally speaking, an arrest has never actually been about the handcuffs or the squad car. At its absolute core, an arrest is defined as the deprivation of personal liberty by a lawful authority.
Okay.
It is the imposition of control that prevents a person from exercising their freedom of movement. And jurisprudence across the globe has consistently held that the essence of an arrest lies in that restriction of liberty, not the specific physical manner in which it is imposed.
So the law basically cares about the result, the restriction itself, not the tool used to achieve it.
Precisely. And that sets the stage for this massive shift we are seeing. Because digital tools are completely redefining what movement and liberty actually mean in practice, we are moving from the restriction of physical bodies to the restriction of data flows.
Wow, so it requires a total mental pivot.
It really does.
Because we're so used to thinking of liberty as the freedom to walk out the front door, right?
Yeah.
To act, to make choices without someone physically standing in our way.
Yeah.
But today, human existence isn't just physical anymore.
No, it's highly digital.
Yeah. Liberty now encompasses the ability to access information, to communicate across networks, and to participate in digital spaces. When a state entity restricts those digital freedoms, they aren't just taking away a luxury, they're restricting actual functional liberty.
Yeah, absolutely are. Because if you cannot communicate, navigate, or participate in the digital economy, your autonomy is effectively neutralized.
It is like someone stealing your vocal cords in your map, but leaving your legs entirely intact.
That is a perfect way to put it.
You can walk around your house, but you are completely cut off from the world.
Yeah.
Is that really freedom?
Most legal scholars would argue no, it isn't. But we hit a massive structural problem here.
Which is?
Our foundational legal frameworks, our constitutional provisions, our statutory laws, the writ of habeas corpus, which literally translates to produce the body, they were entirely written for a physical world.
Right. Produce the body, not the data packet.
Exactly. They were designed to protect bodies from being thrown into dungeons. They were not designed to protect a data packet from being black-holed by an internet service provider. So courts are now scrambling. They are being forced to reinterpret centuries-old legal definitions of liberty to fit a modern, hyper-connected reality.
And that scramble is exactly where the friction happens, isn't it?
Yeah.
It brings up the actual mechanisms of control. Because if liberty is now digital, what do the modern handcuffs physically look like?
Well, there is a whole spectrum of enforcement tools now.
Right, and the obvious ones are things we are already familiar with, like electronic monitoring and geofencing. We get how those work. A GPS device creates an invisible perimeter, and if the signal crosses that line, boom, the authorities are alerted. It is basically traditional house arrest.
Yeah, exactly.
But the concept of the digital arrest goes so much further into broader, totally invisible measures. We are talking about internet shutdowns, targeted digital blackouts, and social media suspensions or algorithmic restrictions.
And the distinction between those tools is critical here. Geofencing is still tethered to physical movement, But a targeted digital blackout completely severs the digital self from the network.
Okay, I have to play devil's advocate here because I think a lot of people listening might share this skepticism.
Go for it.
I get the ankle bracelet. That is obviously a restriction of movement. But a social media ban? Can we really, from a legal standpoint, call losing a Twitter account or getting geofenced out of a group chat a form of arrest? I mean, it feels like a stretch to put that on the same level as sitting in a concrete jail cell.
It is a totally valid skepticism. But if we connect this to the bigger picture, we have to examine the absolute causality of how modern society functions today.
Okay.
Think about the mechanics of everyday survival. Commerce, communication, banking, employment. These are no longer just enhanced by the internet, they are exclusively hosted on it.
True. You literally cannot apply for most jobs today without an email address or an online portal.
Exactly. So how does a targeted digital blackout actually work? It isn't just someone deleting your social media profile. The state can compel an internet service provider or a telecommunications company to essentially black hole your specific IP address or deactivate your SIM card at the network level.
Oh, wow. So it's not just an app, it's everything.
Right. You turn on your phone and it connects to nothing. Your credit cards ping a server that refuses to respond. You try to send a message and the data packet is dropped before it ever leaves your device.
That is terrifying.
It is. If the state utilizes its power to enact that level of isolation, the impact is profoundly debilitating. It may not be a 10 by 10 concrete box, but the mechanism prevents that person from functioning in modern society just as effectively as a physical cell would.
I see what you mean.
Yeah, denying that access isn't an inconvenience in a wired age, it is a total deprivation of autonomy.
When you break down the actual network level blocking, it makes total sense. You are physically free to walk down the street, but you are a ghost. You can't buy food, you can't call for help, you can't navigate.
You are functionally paralyzed.
Because the restriction of the digital self is essentially the restriction of the physical self now.
Yeah.
They are inseparable. But here's where it gets really interesting and honestly, highly concerning.
Oh, absolutely.
It is one thing to be digitally confined for a crime you've actually committed, but the source text reveals these invisible tools are actively being used preemptively. We are entering full Minority Report territory here.
The shift toward predictive policing algorithms is perhaps the most legally precarious development in this entire landscape.
Right, because authorities aren't just reacting to crimes anymore. They're using algorithms to ingest massive amounts of data to identify individuals who are deemed mathematically at risk of committing future crimes.
Yes, based on statistical models.
And based purely on that algorithmic prediction.
Yeah.
The state is imposing preemptive restrictions on those individuals' movements or deeply monitoring their digital activities before a crime ever happens. I mean, how does due process even work here?
It doesn't, really. That is the huge issue.
Due process fundamentally relies on the presumption of innocence.
Right.
And the ability to confront the evidence against you. If my liberty is taken away by an algorithm that predicts what I might do next Tuesday, how do I face my accuser? How do you cross-examine a piece of code?
You are highlighting a complete failure of established legal safeguards. Because due process is not just an abstract concept, it is a rigid procedural requirement.
Right.
If the state wants to deprive you of liberty, they must follow specific steps. You have the right to be informed of the exact reasons, the right to legal representation, and crucially, the right to challenge the restriction before an impartial authority.
But how do you challenge it when there's no person behind the decision? It's like an automated credit score drop. Imagine waking up, your credit score is 0, you can't buy a house, you can't get a loan, and when you try to fix it, there is no human to talk to, just a proprietary formula that no one is allowed to see.
Yes, exactly.
Only in this case, it's not a mortgage on the line, it's your actual freedom.
That analogy is highly accurate because it gets to the core of the opacity problem. When you introduce algorithmic digital detention, accountability is completely obscured. The evidence is a risk score generated by a black box system.
Right, pulling from God knows where.
Precisely. These algorithms scrape location data, transaction histories, and association graphs, who you interact with online. But the code itself is usually proprietary. It is owned by a private tech contractor.
Wait, really? So a defense attorney can't even look at the code to see why their client was flagged?
In many jurisdictions, no, they cannot. The code is protected as a trade secret.
That is insane.
It is a massive problem. So you have a judge deferring to a statistical probability generated by a machine and a defendant who is legally blocked from interrogating the mechanism that just took away their freedom. Who is accountable?
Right, is it the developer who wrote the code? the police department that licensed it, the algorithm itself.
Exactly. The traditional steps of due process simply do not function when the accuser is a proprietary equation. The presumption of innocence is entirely inverted when your liberty is curtailed based on what a statistical model implies you might do, rather than concrete, verifiable actions you have actually taken.
And because these algorithmic tools and digital network blackouts are so heavily automated and opaque, they easily bypass the usual checks and balances, which leads to massive collateral damage. And that brings up a major legal concept from the text: proportionality.
Yes, proportionality is key here.
The basic idea that if the state restricts liberty, the restriction has to be proportionate to the objective. But digital measures are notoriously broad and messy.
They are inherently blunt instruments.
Exactly. Take a regional internet shutdown. We see this happen globally, where authorities shut down the entire telecom network of a region to catch a single fugitive, or maybe disrupt a specific coordinated event.
We see it quite frequently, yes.
It is the equivalent of shutting down a city's entire physical highway system. Trapping all the ambulances, the fire trucks, the delivery drivers, just to stop one speeding car. The sheer scale of the disruption is staggering. How can courts possibly justify that legally?
This raises an important question about international human rights law, which honestly offers a framework that domestic courts often struggle to implement. If we look at the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, the ICCPR, it is a foundational text for global human rights.
Okay, what does the ICCPR say about this?
Well, Article 9 strictly prohibits arbitrary detention, and Article 12 protects the freedom of movement. The overarching mandate is that any deprivation of liberty must be lawful, necessary, and strictly proportionate.
So the highway shutdown analogy, that fails the proportionality test instantly.
Absolutely. When an internet service provider is ordered to drop all connections in a 50-mile radius, thousands of innocent people who rely on those networks for their livelihoods, their medical devices, and their physical safety are caught in the sweep.
Just massive collateral damage.
Yes. The state's objective might be valid, apprehending a dangerous individual, but the mechanism used causes collateral damage on a scale that makes it entirely disproportionate. We are starting to see a growing recognition in international legal circles that these broad digital blackouts violate the core tenets of the ICCPR precisely because digital infrastructure is no longer a luxury. It is the fundamental substrate of modern survival.
That brings up another fascinating legal gray area from the text, which is consent. Because it is not always a sweeping, forceful blackout. Sometimes it looks like a choice, right? People consent to digital monitoring.
Oh, the consent argument is fascinating.
We see this all the time with bail or parole conditions, where someone agrees to wear a GPS monitor or install tracking software on their phone to avoid sitting in a physical prison cell. On paper, that looks like a voluntary, mutually agreed upon contract.
It does on paper, but we have to dissect the actual mechanics of how that consent is obtained. It is critical to look at the power dynamic in that room.
Because it's not really a true choice, is it?
Not at all. It is consent under extreme duress. I mean, if the alternative to agreeing to 247 digital surveillance, algorithmic monitoring of your communications, and strict geofencing is being locked inside a violent, overcrowded physical prison for months while awaiting trial, is that choice entirely voluntary?
Right, it's a gilded cage scenario. You are choosing the invisible cage only because the iron cage is the alternative.
Correct. The individual is signing on the dotted line, which appears to legitimize the state's restriction, but it deeply challenges the concept of true individual autonomy. The state basically uses the threat of severe physical deprivation to extract compliance for extreme digital supervision.
Which allows the justice system to vastly expand its surveillance net without triggering the intense legal scrutiny that physical incarceration would normally demand, just because the defendant agreed to it.
Precisely.
Which perfectly transitions us to the most complex piece of this puzzle, the invisible wardens. We've talked about the tools and the legal frameworks, but who is actually pulling the levers? Who enforces the digital arrest? Because unlike a physical arrest where you have a sworn badge-wearing officer of the state physically turning the key, digital restrictions heavily rely on private tech companies.
And this is where the lines of authority become incredibly blurred.
Right, because if a government wants to restrict my digital movement, they don't have a magic button on the president's desk. They have to issue a directive to an internet service provider, a cellular network, or a social media platform.
Yes, the state must act through private proxies.
So, if a private social media platform suspends my account at the direct, secret request of the government who actually just arrested me, Am I a prisoner of the state, or am I a prisoner of a tech CEO?
That specific mechanism, the state deputizing private infrastructure, is the exact puzzle courts are struggling to solve right now. It is a highly complex interplay between public authority and private power. And the real danger here is the total elimination of transparency.
Because there is no public record.
Exactly. Think about the mechanics of a traditional physical arrest. It is highly visible. It happens in the physical world, often in front of witnesses. There is an immediate paper trail. There is a public booking log, an arraignment process, a judge, a courtroom.
Right, everyone can see it happening.
It is subject to deeply established, highly visible procedures. But digital restrictions can be entirely opaque. A private tech company receives a national security letter or a secret court order. They are legally gagged from talking about it. They tweak an algorithm, they revoke an API key, or they black hole an IP address. And you, as the target, might experience dropped connections, restricted reach, or an inability to access banking apps. You might just think it's a glitch.
You wouldn't even know you were essentially under house arrest.
And that is the most terrifying aspect. If you do not know you are being digitally detained, you cannot file a legal challenge. You cannot demand a lawyer.
Because there's nothing to point to.
Right. The lack of transparency completely neutralizes legal oversight. Private companies are acting as the enforcement arm of the state, but operating behind the shield of corporate secrecy and proprietary algorithms.
And because it's entirely invisible, it doesn't trigger the same visceral outrage from the public. If we see a video of someone being tackled and handcuffed in the street for no reason, there is massive public backlash. But if an algorithm quietly suffocates someone's digital existence, no one sees it. Which brings up the ultimate risk we're looking at here: normalization.
That is the frog in the boiling water scenario, because a digital arrest or an algorithmic restriction feels, well, practically less intrusive than being thrown into a brick-and-mortar cell. Society risks normalizing the underlying deprivation of liberty.
We accept the premise because the execution feels softer.
Precisely. We start to accept constant algorithmic monitoring, predictive risk scoring, and digital confinement as just standard administrative functions of modern life.
Just part of living in a digital age.
Right. And when society does that, we quietly, collectively lower the threshold for state intervention. What begins as an exceptional measure, say using a targeted blackout to isolate a highly dangerous individual, gradually becomes routine.
It creeps into everyday law enforcement.
Yes. The state starts using it for lesser offenses, then for civil infractions, then for administrative compliance. The legal barriers erode because the public isn't pushing back until mass, preemptive digital supervision is simply the baseline of existence.
It is crucial to note, though, that there is a flip side to this. We want to be impartial here. The original source text points out that we aren't just looking at a pure dystopian nightmare. There are structural realities to why these tools are being adopted so rapidly.
There are practical benefits, undoubtedly. Digital tools, when strictly regulated and transparently applied, offer vital alternatives to physical incarceration.
Right, because physical prisons are a mess.
Our traditional prison systems are notoriously overcrowded, dangerous, and incredibly expensive to maintain. Digital supervision can allow non-violent offenders to remain in their communities, to maintain employment, and to support their families while still satisfying the legal requirement of supervision.
So the technology itself isn't inherently evil.
No technology is. The challenge isn't that the capability exists. The challenge lies entirely in the legal architecture surrounding it. How do we ensure these tools strike a precise balance between public safety and fundamental individual rights? How do we build transparency into black box algorithms?
We have to update the rules of the game.
Exactly. We need to enforce legal principles rather than allowing technology to bypass them simply because it is convenient for the state.
So what does this all mean? If we step back and look at the whole picture we've unpacked today, the fundamental takeaway is that the architecture of liberty is changing.
It really is.
As the boundaries between the physical world and digital networks permanently blur, your freedom is no longer solely defined by where your physical body is allowed to walk. It is entirely dependent on where your data, your communications, and your digital identity are allowed to flow.
The state has discovered a mechanism to exert immense targeted control over an individual's life without ever crossing their physical threshold.
Exactly. The definition of an arrest is being rewritten in real time, moving from physical custody to network isolation. And our centuries-old legal frameworks are currently losing the race to keep these invisible wardens in check.
Which means the most important conversation isn't about the technology itself anymore.
Right.
The technology has already proven that the state can restrict your liberty without handcuffs. The only question that matters now is whether society will allow them to decide when and how they use that power, or if we will demand new legal structures that protect the digital self with the exact same ferocity that we protect the physical body.
It completely reframes how you look at the basic infrastructure of your daily life. And I want to leave you, the listener, with a final thought to mull over. If our legal systems eventually catch up and they fully formalize and legitimize digital confinement as a standard legally sound practice, if they formalize it as a legally sound practice, will the physical prison eventually become entirely obsolete?
That is a staggering thought.
Imagine a future where there are no brick-and-mortar jails at all. Just a society of people walking around freely in the physical world, going to the park, walking down the street, but completely trapped in customized, invisible digital bubbles they can never, ever escape. They can't process a payment, they can't send a message, they can't access a map. It's a truly chilling thought, especially when you realize that the walls of those future cells won't be made of concrete, but of code. Something to think about the next time you connect to the Wi-Fi.
Subscribe to Ambat Legal Insight and stay legally informed with clear, practical, and reliable breakdowns of the law. Follow our channel and activate the bell icon so you never miss important legal updates, case analyses, and expert insights that matter to every citizen. Support our mission of spreading legal awareness by liking, sharing, and commenting, because your one action can help thousands become more legally empowered. Join the ALI community today across YouTube, podcast, and social platforms and take a step toward understanding your rights, your laws, and your justice. Ambat Legal Insight, because law is for everyone.